The human First Expeditionary Fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the Selthari colony world of Vetha Prime on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. 92 warships, led by Admiral Connie Marsh, aboard the dreadnought USS Galloway. It was not a large fleet by galactic standards. The Valkar blockade around Vetha Prime had 140 ships, and every single one of them was bigger than anything the humans had brought. The Valkar were already busy when the humans arrived. Their ships hung in orbit like a ring of iron, firing down at the planet below in slow, methodical volleys. Vetha Prime had been burning for 6 days. Its great hive cities, which had stood for thousands of years, were crumbling under the bombardment. Millions of Selthari had fled underground, but the shelters were running out of air and food. Those who could not reach the shelters were dead or dying on the surface. Fleet Commander Riskar, the Valkar officer in charge of the siege, was the first to notice the human ships on his sensors. He studied the readings with mild interest. 92 ships. He had heard about the human mobilization and had expected them to come, but he had not expected so few. It was almost insulting. He opened a communication channel. His translator turned his rumbling voice into flat mechanical English. Human fleet, this is Fleet Commander Riskar of the Valkar Dominion. You are outnumbered and outgunned. I will give you one chance to leave. Turn your ships around now, and I will pretend this never happened. Stay, and you will die here. On the bridge of the Galloway, Admiral Connie Marsh listened to the message with her arms crossed. Her flag captain, a calm and careful man named Peter Langley, stood beside her, waiting for her orders. Connie did not respond to Riskar. She simply turned to Peter and said, "Launch all strike wings. Target their command ships first. Hit them fast and hit them hard." Peter relayed the orders without hesitation. Across the fleet, hangar doors opened, and fighters poured out into the black. Weapon systems powered up. Targeting computers locked on. The Battle of Vetha Prime had begun. Fleet Commander Riskar expected the humans to form a battle line and exchange fire at long range, the way civilized species fought wars. That was how every species in the galaxy fought. You lined up your ships, you traded shots, and the side with more firepower won. It was simple. It was logical. Humans did not fight that way. The human fleet split into 6 groups and attacked from 6 different directions at the same time. They came in fast, much faster than the Valkar expected, pushing their engines past safe limits. Human ships were smaller and lighter than Valkar vessels, but they were quick. They darted through the gaps in the Valkar formation, like wolves running through a herd of cattle, getting in close where the big Valkar guns could not track them. The Valkar gunners tried to adjust. They were trained soldiers, and they were not stupid. But the humans moved in ways that made no sense. They flew too close to enemy ships, skimming along hulls, weaving through flak fields that should have torn them apart. No sane species would fly that close. The risk was too high. One mistake, and you were dead. But human pilots did not seem to care about the risk. They cared about winning. And then the electronic warfare hit. Human electronic warfare technology was decades ahead of anything the Valkar had encountered. Without warning, Valkar targeting systems went blind. Communication channels filled with static and noise. Shield frequencies that should have been secret were suddenly being broadcast on open channels for everyone to hear. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly moments ago were now deaf and dumb, unable to talk to each other, unable to aim their weapons properly. Riskar screamed orders at his officers, but half of them could not hear him through the jamming. In the middle of the chaos, Lieutenant Megan Price was leading a fighter squadron from the Arcadia. She was not a woman who sat back and gave orders from a safe distance. She flew her own ship, a small and fast strike craft armed with precision charges. Her squadron had been given a target. A Valkar heavy cruiser that was still managing to fire on the planet below despite the jamming. Megan studied the cruiser on her sensors and found its weak point. The ship's engine vent, a narrow opening at the rear of the vessel. It was a gap barely wide enough for her strike craft to fit through, and any approach would mean flying straight through the cruiser's rear defense grid. "Price, that is insane," her wingman said over the radio. "Yeah," she replied. "Cover me." She flew straight at the cruiser. Point defense guns fired all around her. Her wingman drew fire while she dove low, skimming beneath the cruiser's belly, and then pulling up hard, lining herself up with the engine vent. She fired a precision charge into the opening, and the blast tore through the cruiser's engine core from the inside out. The ship shuddered, its engines died, and it began to drift. Megan pulled out at the last second, but the blast wave caught her ship and ripped off her port wing. She spiraled toward the Arcadia, fighting with her controls the whole way. Her ship slid across the deck in a shower of sparks and slammed into the far wall. The hangar crew rushed to her cockpit. They found her climbing out on her own, her left shoulder hanging at a bad angle, a dislocated joint, and a grin spread across her face. "That cruiser is not shooting at anyone anymore," she said to the medic who reached her first. While Megan was handling the cruiser, Commander Danny Holt was fighting his own battle on the bridge of the Arcadia. He was coordinating the ship's weapons fire, calling out targets, adjusting their position moment by moment as the battle swirled around them. He was good at it. He had a feel for the fight, a sense for where the enemy was weak and where they were strong. And he saw something that no one else did. The Velkar command ship, a massive vessel called the Fang of Krethos, had moved. Riskar had repositioned it to escape the worst of the human electronic warfare cloud, pulling it away from the main formation. In doing so, he had left it without the support of its escort ships. For a brief window, the Fang was alone. Danny made his decision in less than 2 seconds. "Helm, all ahead full. Bring us straight at the Fang of Krethos. Weapons, target their forward shields and fire everything." The Arcadia surged forward. It was not a big ship, not compared to the Fang, but Danny did not need to destroy it. He just needed to hurt it. The Arcadia's guns hammered the Fang's forward shields. The shields held for a moment, then buckled, then failed. Shots punched through into the hull. Explosions rippled across the Fang's bow. Secondary systems went down. The bridge shook. Fleet Commander Riskar, standing on the command deck of the Fang of Krethos, felt his ship shudder under the human assault. Warning lights flashed across every console. His officers shouted damage reports. For the first time in his military career, Riskar felt something he did not recognize. It was fear. He gave the order to retreat. The Velkar fleet broke. Ships that had been holding formation began to pull back, then to run. The retreat spread through the fleet like a disease. Within an hour, the blockade around Vetha Prime was gone. The numbers told the story. Of the 140 Velkar ships, 61 were destroyed, and 29 were so badly damaged they would never fight again. The humans lost 11 ships. 11 ships against 90 Velkar vessels destroyed or crippled. It was a ratio that should have been impossible, but it had happened. When the fighting was over, human dropships landed on Vetha Prime. They carried not weapons, but medical supplies, food, water purifiers, and engineering teams. Soldiers stepped out onto the scorched ground and immediately began helping. They set up field hospitals. They pulled survivors from collapsed shelters. They handed out blankets and rations to Selthari civilians who had not eaten in days. Peter Langley came down to the surface to oversee the relief effort. He walked through the ruins of the capital hive city, stepping over rubble and ash, his boots crunching on broken glass. Everywhere he looked, there was destruction. A Selthari elder approached him. The elder was old, his exoskeleton cracked and gray, and he moved slowly. His translator device crackled and hummed as it converted his clicking language into English. "Why?" the elder asked. "Your assembly did nothing for us. We are not your allies. We have no treaty with your kind. We have nothing to offer you. No resources, no technology, nothing. So why did you come?" Peter Langley looked at the old Selthari for a long time. He looked at the ruined city around them. He looked at the human medics, carefully carrying injured Selthari on stretchers. He looked at a group of Selthari children, huddled together, watching the humans with wide, confused eyes. "Because it was the right thing to do," Peter said. The elder stared at him. His translator clicked softly. Then he reached out one of his thin, segmented limbs and touched Peter's hand, a gesture that in Selthari culture meant something deeper than any words could express. Across the galaxy, the footage from Vetha Prime spread. Every species with access to the Galactic Communication Network saw it. They saw the battle. They saw the impossible numbers. They saw the human soldiers helping the wounded. They saw Peter Langley standing in the ashes, and they heard what he said. The Galactic Assembly was silent for the first time in living memory. And in his command chamber, far from Vetha Prime, War Speaker Drawthan watched the battle recordings again and again. He did not laugh this time. He did not smile. He sat in the dark and watched the humans tear his fleet apart. And he began to understand that he had made a very serious mistake. The news of the Battle of Vetha Prime moved through the galaxy like a fire through dry grass. Every species heard about it. Every government discussed it. In the halls of the Galactic Assembly, delegations that had ignored humanity for decades suddenly wanted meetings. They wanted to talk to the human ambassadors. They wanted to understand what had just happened. Because what had happened should not have been possible. A fleet of 92 ships had beaten a fleet of 140. The casualty numbers were not close. The humans had lost 11 ships. The Veilkar had lost 90. It was the kind of result that broke every military model the Assembly had ever used. The models said that numbers won wars. The models said that the bigger fleet always won. The models had never accounted for humans. The Selthari Collective, overwhelmed with gratitude, offered humanity a gift that no species had ever received: full access to the Selthari medical archives. This was a treasure beyond measure. The Selthari had spent 10,000 years studying medicine and biology. Their archives contained cures for 17 diseases that still killed people on human worlds. It was a gift worth more than any planet, and the Selthari gave it freely. But the war was far from over. War Speaker Drawthan had been humiliated at Vetha Prime, and humiliation was something the Veilkar did not tolerate. He pulled his remaining fleets together, over 3,000 warships in total, and he launched a massive three-pronged attack. One fleet pushed deeper into Selthari space, burning everything in its path. A second fleet moved to cut off the supply routes between human space and the Selthari worlds, and a third fleet, the largest, drove straight toward the Narissa Corridor. The Narissa Corridor was a chain of jump points that connected Selthari space to the wider galaxy. Whoever controlled the corridor controlled access to the Selthari. If the Veilkar took it, they could surround the Selthari completely and starve them out, even with human help. Admiral Connie Marsh studied the intelligence reports aboard the Galloway and understood the danger immediately. She sent a priority message to Earth requesting full mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon that humanity could field. The United Earth Defense Council, which had been half-hearted about the war just weeks ago, now voted unanimously for total commitment. The footage from Vetha Prime had changed everything. People on Earth, on Mars, on every colony world had seen the burning cities and the grateful faces of the Selthari survivors. The protests stopped. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. But even with full mobilization, it would take months for the new ships to reach the front. In the meantime, Connie had to hold the line with what she had. Something that changed the course of the war. The Korvathi came. The Korvathi were a tall, thin, gray-skinned species known throughout the galaxy as traders and merchants. They had no warships. They had no soldiers. What they had was money, resources, and the largest logistics network in known space. Korvathi freighters carried goods to every corner of the galaxy. Their fuel depots, their supply stations, their trade routes, these were the veins through which the galaxy's economy flowed. The Korvathi had been paying protection tribute to the Valkar for generations. Every year, they handed over a portion of their wealth to the Dominion, in exchange for not being invaded. It was extortion, plain and simple, and the Korvathi hated it, but they had no way to fight back. Until now. A Korvathi representative named Ulvan arrived at the human embassy on Assembly Station. He was tall, even for a Korvathi, and he spoke with the careful precision of someone who had spent his life making deals. "We cannot fight," Ulvan told the human ambassador, a sharp and clever woman named Laura Beckett. "We have no ships of war, we have no weapons, but we have fuel, we have raw materials, we have food, we have the ability to move supplies across the galaxy faster than anyone else. If you are going to fight the Valkar, you will need these things. We are offering them to you." Laura Beckett looked at him for a long moment. "What do you want in return?" Ulvan's thin lips pulled into something that might have been a smile. "We want to stop paying tribute to people who treat us like dirt." Laura shook his hand. The deal was done. The Korvathi were not the only ones who came forward. The Drenari reached out next. They were an aquatic species, beings who lived in vast ocean worlds and breathed water instead of air. They had no fleet and no interest in war. But their scientists were among the best in the galaxy, and their specialty was shield technology. Drenari shields were stronger, more flexible, and more adaptive than anything anyone else could build. The Drenari offered to upgrade every human warship with their shield systems. When asked why, their representative said simply, "The Valkar burned a world of innocent people. Today, it is the Selthari. Tomorrow, it could be us. We would rather help you stop them now than wait for them to come for us later." One by one, more species came. Some offered supplies, some offered intelligence, some offered access to hidden trade routes that the Valkar did not know about. They were all species that had been bullied, threatened, or ignored by the Valkar for centuries. They had been too afraid to stand up on their own. But when they saw that someone else was willing to fight, when they saw that it was possible to stand up to the Dominion and win, their fear began to turn into something else: hope. While the alliance grew, Captain Danny Holt, freshly promoted after Vetha Prime, was given the hardest job in the fleet. He was ordered to hold the Narissa corridor. He had 40 ships. Intelligence said the Valkar were sending 500. Danny looked at the numbers and did not blink. He had learned something at Vetha Prime. Numbers were not everything. Position mattered. Timing mattered. And more than anything, the willingness to fight harder and smarter than the enemy mattered. He set up his defense in the narrowest part of the corridor, a stretch of space between two dense asteroid fields where the jump points were clustered close together. The Valkar would have to come through single file, or close to it. Their 500 ships would not be able to spread out and use their numbers. Danny mined the jump points with everything he had. Thousands of mines, hidden among the asteroids, programmed to activate when they detected Valkar engine signatures. He positioned his ships in overlapping fields of fire so that every angle of approach was covered. And he deployed his secret weapon, drone swarms. Autonomous combat drones were a human invention that no other species had developed. They were small, cheap, and expendable. Each drone carried a single warhead and was controlled by a simple but effective targeting program. Released in swarms of hundreds, they would overwhelm enemy point defense systems and detonate against hulls. They were not powerful enough to destroy a warship on their own, but 100 of them hitting the same ship at the same time could cripple it. Megan Price, now Danny's executive officer, oversaw the drone deployment. She placed the swarms in hidden positions among the asteroids, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Then she turned to Danny and said, "If this does not work, we are going to have a very bad day." Danny smiled. "It will work." The Vilkar fleet arrived 2 days later. 512 ships, led by a veteran commander who had crushed a dozen smaller species in his career. He saw 40 human ships blocking the corridor and assumed this would be easy. He was wrong. The first wave of Vilkar ships hit the minefield and lost 30 vessels in the first 10 minutes. Explosions lit up the corridor like a chain of small suns. The surviving ships pushed forward and ran into the drone swarms. Hundreds of tiny warheads slamming into shields and hulls, overloading defenses, blinding sensors. The Vilkar formation, already squeezed by the narrow corridor, became a confused mess of ships trying to dodge mines, fight off drones, and shoot back at the human vessels, all at the same time. Danny's ships fired from their prepared positions, pouring concentrated firepower into the disordered Vilkar columns. Every shot counted. Every volley hit its target. The Vilkar tried to advance, but the corridor was too narrow. They tried to flank, but the asteroid fields blocked them. They tried to fall back, but the ships behind them were still pushing forward, creating a traffic jam of warships that made a perfect target. The Battle of Narissa Corridor lasted 14 hours. When it was over, the corridor was filled with the wreckage of 132 Vilkar ships. Danny had lost 19 of his 40, nearly half his fleet. Some were barely holding together. But the corridor held. When the surviving Vilkar ships finally retreated, Danny sat down in his command chair and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 14 hours straight. Megan Price brought him a cup of coffee. It was cold because the ship's galley had taken a hit 6 hours ago, and nobody had time to fix it. Danny drank it anyway, and it was the best coffee he had ever tasted. The news reached War Speaker Drothon within hours. He stood in his command chamber, reading the reports, and his claws dug grooves into the metal table in front of him. 40 ships. The humans had held the corridor with 40 ships against 500. His officers waited for him to speak, but he said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous, and every officer in the room felt the cold running down their spines. "Bring me more ships," he said. The war was not over. It was only getting started. 6 months had passed since the first shots were fired above Vetha Prime, and the war had changed in ways that nobody had predicted. Earth's shipyards were running day and night, building new warships with Korvathi-supplied materials that arrived in a steady river of freighters. Drennerai engineers worked alongside human technicians, fitting every frontline vessel with adaptive shield systems that made human ships much harder to kill. And the Selthari, a species that had never built a weapon of war in its entire history, had begun constructing warships of their own. They were simple ships, not pretty to look at, but they were crewed by beings who now had a reason to fight. The alliance that nobody expected was becoming real. Admiral Connie Marsh set up a joint command center at Forward Base Helios, an asteroid station that human engineers had carved into a fortress. For the first time in galactic history, 4 different species worked side by side in a military operation. The differences between them were enormous. The Selthari communicated through pheromones and clicking sounds. The Korvathi were nocturnal and preferred to work in darkness. The Drenari needed water tanks and humid air to breathe properly. The humans were loud and drank too much coffee, but they made it work. They made it work because they had something in common that was bigger than their differences. They all wanted the Veilhar to stop. Connie promoted Danny Holt again, this time to the rank that let him command an entire strike group. She gave him a mixed fleet of human and Selthari ships and named it Strike Group Valor. Their mission was to go behind Veilhar lines and hit the enemy where it hurt. Danny's first target was Korvan Station. It was a massive Veilhar supply depot floating in deep space, far from any planet. Every warship on the Veilhar Eastern Front depended on Korvan for fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts. If Korvan fell, the Eastern Front would collapse. The Veilhar knew this, and they had defended it accordingly. 200 warships guarded the station. A network of orbital weapons platforms surrounded it. Getting close would be nearly impossible. Danny studied the intelligence reports for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, eating meals at his desk, while Megan Price kept the ship running around him. On the 4th day, he called a meeting with his senior officers. "We cannot punch through 200 ships and a defense grid," he told them. "Not head-on. We do not have the numbers. So we are not going to punch through. We are going to walk in through the front door." He explained the plan. The Korvathi were still expected to deliver tribute to the Veilhar. Despite the war, some Korvathi freighters continued their routes because stopping all trade would have been noticed immediately. Danny wanted to use this. He would have Korvathi freighters approach Korvan Station carrying what looked like a normal tribute delivery. But instead of goods, the freighters would be packed with electronic warfare generators and drone launchers hidden beneath fake cargo. When the freighters got close enough, they would activate everything at once. The station's sensors would go blind. Its communications would die. And in that moment of confusion, Danny's strike group would drop out of hyperspace right on top of the Veilhar formation. It was risky. If the Veilhar inspected the freighters before they reached the activation point, the whole plan would fall apart. If the timing was off by even a few minutes, the strike group would arrive before the jamming started and get torn to pieces. Megan Price listened to the plan and shook her head slowly. "This is either brilliant or insane," she said. "It can be both," Danny replied. The operation launched on a cold Thursday morning by Earth's calendar. Not that days of the week meant much in deep space. 3 Korvathi freighters, crewed by Korvathi volunteers who knew exactly what they were carrying, approached Korvan Station on their normal approach vector. The Veilhar challenged them, checked their cargo manifests, and waved them through. The Veilhar had been taking tribute from the Korvathi for so long that they did not even think to be suspicious. The freighters reached close range. The lead Korvathi captain, a traitor who had spent his whole life being pushed around by the Dominion, pressed the activation button. The station went dark. Every sensor, every communication array, every targeting system overloaded and shut down. The orbital weapons platforms, which relied on the station's targeting data, went silent. The 200 defending warships suddenly could not see, could not talk, and could not coordinate. 6 seconds later, Strike Group Valor dropped out of hyperspace. Danny Holt hit them like a hammer. The battle around Horavan Station was exactly the kind of fight that humans excelled at. Close quarters, chaotic, fast-moving. The Veilhar, blinded and confused, tried to form up and respond, but the human ships were already among them, firing from point-blank range, using the enemy's own confusion as a weapon. The Selthari ships, linked by their natural hive-mind communication, moved together with perfect coordination, focusing fire on one target at a time, and burning through enemy ships like a laser through paper. It was brutal, and it was bloody, and it was over in less than 2 hours. The Veilhar lost 87 ships. The rest fled or surrendered. Danny lost 14 ships, each one a wound that he felt in his chest, but the station was his. Megan Price led the boarding action personally. She and 200 human marines in powered armor stormed the station through its docking ports, advancing compartment by compartment through the dark corridors. The Valkar defenders were bigger and stronger than the humans. A Valkar soldier could tear a human apart with his bare claws. But in the tight corridors of the station, with the lights out and the Valkar unable to coordinate, the human marines had the advantage. They moved in disciplined teams, covering each other, using flashbang grenades and smoke to disorient the defenders. Megan reached the station's command center first. She kicked in the door, her rifle up, and found the Valkar station commander standing alone behind his desk. He was a huge reptilian figure, scarred from decades of combat, and he looked at her with contempt. "You are a small creature," he said through his translator. "You think you have won something here." Megan kept her rifle steady. "I think you are under arrest," she replied. The fall of Korvan Station was a disaster for the Valkar Eastern Front. Without supplies, their forward fleets began to run dry. Ships that could not refuel were forced to retreat. Offensives stalled. The momentum that the Dominion had built in the early months of the war evaporated almost overnight. War Speaker Drothon received the news in his command chamber, and did not speak for a long time. His generals watched him carefully. They had seen his moods grow darker and more dangerous as the war progressed. The easy victory he had promised them was nowhere in sight. Instead, they were losing. Losing to a species that had been in space for barely 2 centuries. Drothon made his decision alone, in the dark, after his generals had left. He opened a sealed vault in the deepest level of his flagship, and activated a communication channel that had not been used in 500 years. The Scourge. The Valkar had possessed a planet-killing weapon for centuries. It was ancient technology, designed during a darker age when the Dominion had ruled through absolute terror. The Galactic Assembly had forbidden its use, and the Valkar had agreed because they had never needed it. Conventional fleets had always been enough. But conventional fleets were not enough anymore. Drothon ordered the Scourge activated and aimed at Vetha Prime, the world the humans had fought to save. The message was clear. This is what happens when you defy the Dominion. You save a world, and we burn it anyway. All your sacrifice, all your dead, all your courage, all for nothing. Human intelligence intercepted the order 72 hours before the Scourge could be deployed. The message reached Admiral Connie Marsh at Forward Base Helios. She read it sitting at her desk, and she went very still. Peter Langley, who was with her, watched her face and saw something he had never seen there before. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. Something that looked like the final settling of a weight that had been building for a long time. Connie opened a channel to every ship in the fleet, every human vessel, every Selthari vessel, every allied ship that could hear her voice. All units, this is Admiral Marsh. The Valkar intend to deploy a planet-killing weapon against Vetha Prime. I am ordering an immediate full fleet advance to intercept. This is not a drill. This is not optional. Every ship that can fly will move to Vetha Prime. We did not come this far to let them burn that world again. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady and quiet, and carried the weight of everything she had ever believed in. We stopped them once. We will stop them again. Fleet advance, now. The combined Allied fleet arrived at Vetha Prime on a morning when the light of the system's star was gold and pale, streaming through the dust and debris that still hung in orbit from the first battle months ago. 412 warships, human, Selthari, and Allied vessels from half a dozen smaller species that had found their courage at last. It was the largest fleet that any of them had ever assembled. It was not enough, not on paper. The Valkar Armada was already waiting, over 2,000 warships, arranged in a formation that stretched across the void like a wall of steel and fire. At the center of the formation sat the Scourge, a weapon platform the size of a small moon. It was ancient and ugly, covered in armor plates that had been added and replaced over centuries, bristling with power conduits that glowed with a sickly green light. Near the Scourge, surrounded by his personal guard fleet, was War Speaker Drothan, aboard his flagship, the Throne of Dominion. The galaxy was watching. The Galactic Assembly had emergency sessions running on every member world. Billions of beings across thousands of planets were glued to their screens, watching the two fleets face each other above the world that had started it all. Everyone knew that what happened here would decide the war. Everyone knew that the odds were against the humans and their allies. Aboard the USS Galloway, Admiral Connie Marsh stood on her bridge and looked at the enemy fleet on the main screen. She had spent the last 12 hours going over her battle plan with Peter Langley and her senior staff. The plan was not complicated, because the best plans never were. But it required everything they had, and it left no room for failure. The Selthari ships, equipped with the best sensor arrays in the galaxy, would scan the Scourge and find its power core. Without knowing exactly where to hit it, destroying something that large would be impossible. The main fleet, human and allied ships together, would engage the Valkar Armada head-on and hold their attention. And Strike Group Valor, under Captain Danny Holt, would punch through the formation and destroy the Scourge. Connie opened a channel to the fleet. She did not give a long speech. That was not her way. "You know why we are here," she said. "You know what they are going to do if we fail. So we are not going to fail. All ships, engage." Captain Danny Holt stood on the bridge of the Arcadia and felt the ship vibrate beneath his feet as the engines pushed to full power. Around him, his crew moved with quiet efficiency, each person doing their job. Megan Price stood at the tactical station, her eyes locked on her screens, her hands steady. Kyle Burton, now a full lieutenant, managed the communications board, keeping the strike group connected. Danny opened a channel to his ships. He looked at the Valkar Armada on his screen, 2,000 ships between him and the Scourge, and he spoke. "This is Captain Holt. I know what the odds look like. I know what we are being asked to do. But I also know who we are. We are the people who showed up when no one else would. We are the people who looked at a galaxy full of fear and said, 'Not today.' So we are going to fly in there, we are going to destroy that weapon, and we are going to come home. All of us. Together. Strike Group Valor, forward." The Battle of Vetha Prime was the largest space engagement in recorded galactic history. The main fleet crashed into the Valkar Armada like a wave hitting a cliff. Human ships dove into the enemy formation with the aggressive, wild tactics that had become their signature, weaving between larger vessels, firing at close range, forcing the Valkar to fight on human terms. Selthari ships moved with their natural hive-mind precision, focusing their fire together on single targets, burning through one enemy ship before moving to the next. The smaller allied vessels filled the gaps, harassing Valkar flanks and disrupting their formations. The Valkar fought back hard. They had numbers, and they had firepower, and they had the desperation of an empire that knew it was fighting for its future. Plasma bolts and missile salvos filled the space between the fleets. Ships exploded on both sides. The void around Vetha Prime turned into a storm of light and metal and death. In the middle of the storm, Strike Group Valor pushed forward. Danny drove the Arcadia through the Valkar formation like a knife through flesh. Enemy ships fired on him from all sides. The Drenari shields held, absorbing hits that would have torn the Arcadia apart months ago. But even the best shields had limits. Every hit took a toll. Every minute cost something. Ships fell around him. The heavy cruiser Steadfast took a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a white flash. The corvette Sparrow was cut in half by a Valkar beam weapon. Danny heard the calls on the radio, the last words of captains he had served with, people he knew by name, and he kept going. There was nothing else to do. Stopping meant the Scourge would fire. Stopping meant Vetha Prime would die. Megan Price coordinated the strike group's fire with a focus that shut out everything except the next target, the next threat, the next 10 seconds. She called out enemy positions, directed countermeasures, managed the drone swarms that still flew alongside the fleet. When a Veilcar destroyer moved to block their path, she identified its weak point and vectored 3 ships to destroy it in a concentrated volley that lasted 8 seconds. They reached the Scourge. Up close, the weapon was even more terrifying than it had looked on sensors. It was enormous, a structure of black metal and green energy that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Around it, close escort warships swarmed like insects guarding a nest. Automated turrets tracked the incoming ships and opened fire. The space around the Scourge became a wall of defensive fire. Danny split his remaining ships into 3 groups. The first group, led by the cruiser Resolute, would draw fire from the automated defenses. The second group would target the Scourge's shield generators, which the Selthari sensors had located on 6 points along its surface. The third group, led by the Arcadia, would hit the power core once the shields were down. The Resolute charged straight at the Scourge, guns blazing, drawing the turret's attention. Megan Price directed the second group against the shield generators. One by one, they went dark. Each one that fell required a different approach, a different angle of attack, and the Veilcar escort ships fought to protect them. Ships were lost, crews died, but the generators fell. Kyle Burton tracked the power core on his sensors. As the last shield generator went dark, the core became visible, a massive structure deep inside the Scourge that glowed with the energy of a small star. "I have it," Kyle said, his voice steady, despite everything happening around them. "Transmitting targeting data now." The Arcadia took a direct hit that tore open 3 decks on the port side. The ship shuddered and groaned. Fires broke out in the lower compartments. Damage alarms screamed. A beam struck the hull near the bridge, and the lights flickered. Danny gripped his chair and held on. "Weapons," he said, and his voice was calm. "Fire everything." The Arcadia fired every weapon it had into the Scourge's exposed core. The Resolute joined in, adding its firepower. A Selthari cruiser, the last ship in its squadron, its hull scarred and burning, positioned itself alongside the Arcadia, and fired its own weapons in support. The core breached. The explosion was blinding. A shockwave of energy and debris erupted outward from the Scourge, rippling across the battlefield. Veilhar ships closest to the blast were torn apart. The shockwave rocked ships on both sides, sending them tumbling. The Arcadia was thrown sideways, spinning, her crew hanging on to whatever they could grab. When the light faded, the Scourge was gone. In its place was a cloud of expanding debris, and a silence that seemed to spread across the entire battlefield. A Veilcar fleet shattered. The destruction of the Scourge broke something inside them. Not just their formation, but their will. Ships began to scatter, to flee, to run for the first time in Veilcar history. The coordinated armada became a mob of individual ships trying to get away. Aboard the Throne of Dominion, War Speaker Drothon stood on his bridge and watched the Scourge die. He watched his fleet come apart. He watched the human ships, battered and bleeding, still pushing forward, still fighting. His communications officer spoke. "War Speaker, the Galactic Assembly has passed an emergency resolution. 12 neutral species have pledged support to the human coalition. The Assembly demands our immediate ceasefire. We are alone." Drothon said nothing for a long time. He stared at the human fleet, at those small, stubborn, impossible ships, and he understood something that he wished he had understood months ago. The humans had not won because they had better technology or bigger ships. They had won because they simply would not stop. They took every hit, every loss, every setback, and they kept coming. Not for conquest, not for revenge, but because they believed that protecting people who could not protect themselves was worth everything, including their lives. "Cease fire," Drawthon said quietly. "All ships, cease fire." The guns went silent. The engines powered down. The battle was over. In the weeks that followed, the peace was negotiated at Assembly Station. The Veilkar Dominion was forced to leave all Selthari territory. They paid for the damage they had done. They destroyed their remaining planet-killing weapons under the observation of Allied inspectors. War Speaker Drawthon was removed from power by his own council, who had seen which way the wind was blowing. Humanity was given a permanent seat on the Galactic Assembly's Security Directorate. It was the first time in over 1,000 years that a new species had been given that honor. Ambassador Laura Beckett accepted it on behalf of Earth, standing in the great chamber of the Assembly with the flags of 100 species around her. Admiral Connie Marsh retired. At her farewell ceremony, surrounded by the officers and soldiers who had served under her, she stood at the podium and said, "We did not go to war because we wanted to. We went because someone had to, and I am proud, prouder than I can ever say, that it was us." Captain Danny Holt brought the Arcadia home. The ship was so badly damaged that it would never fly again. Its hull was scarred, its decks were torn open, and half its systems were held together with temporary patches and hope. The ship was placed in permanent dock at the Luna Memorial Shipyard, preserved as a monument to everyone who had served on her and everyone who had not come home. Danny was promoted, but he told Megan Price quietly over a drink in a bar on the moon that he missed being on the bridge. Megan smiled and told him that she understood. She had been given command of a new ship, the USS Defiance, the first vessel built with combined human, Drenari, and Selthari technology. Kyle Burton was her first officer. They launched 3 months later, heading out into the stars. On Vetha Prime, the Selthari rebuilt their world. It took years. The scars of the war were deep, and they would never fully disappear. But in the center of their restored capital city, they built a monument. 2 figures carved from white stone, a human hand reaching down, and a Selthari limb reaching up, their fingers almost touching. The inscription, translated from the Selthari language, read, "They came when no one else would. They stayed when they could have left. They fought when they had nothing to gain. Remember the humans. Remember what courage looks like." Across the galaxy, species that had laughed at humanity, that had dismissed them as loud, emotional, short-lived creatures from an unimportant world, began to see them differently. Humans were still all of those things. They were loud, they were emotional, they lived short lives, and they felt everything too deeply. But now, when a human ship entered a system, nobody laughed. The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Assembly for just under 60 years. Most alien species did not think much of humans. They saw them as newcomers to the stars, loud creatures, emotional creatures, beings that lived short lives and fought among themselves too often. The older civilizations tolerated humans, but they did not respect them. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was a small and unimportant world on the edge of known space, and its people were barely worth noticing. That was about to change. On the far side of the galaxy, the Dominion of Veilkar launched its invasion. The Veilkar were a reptilian species, cold-blooded in body and in spirit. Their empire covered more than 900 star systems, and their military was one of the largest ever assembled. They had 4,000 warships, millions of soldiers, and a hunger for conquest that had been growing for centuries. Their target was the Selthari Collective, a peaceful federation of insectoid beings known throughout the galaxy for their medicine and their philosophy. The Selthari had no military. They had never needed one. They believed in harmony, in cooperation, in the idea that intelligent beings could solve their problems without violence. The Velkar did not share that belief. The invasion began without warning. Velkar warships dropped out of hyperspace above Selthari colony worlds and began bombing. Cities burned. Millions of Selthari civilians ran for their lives, pouring into underground shelters or fleeing into the countryside. Some tried to escape into space, but Velkar ships shot down their transports. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones did not. The Selthari leaders sent desperate messages to the Galactic Assembly, begging for help. The Assembly held meetings. They passed resolutions. They issued formal statements of concern. No ships were sent. No armies were mobilized. The Assembly was afraid of the Velkar, and everyone knew it. Thousands of light years away, Commander Danny Holt sat in his chair on the bridge of the human deep space carrier USS Arcadia. Danny was 34 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too many long patrols. The Arcadia was on a routine mission near the border of human space when its communication systems picked up the first Selthari distress signals. Kyle Burton, the young communications officer, put the signals on the main screen. The bridge went quiet. They watched footage sent by Selthari survivors. Burning hive cities, bodies in the streets, a Selthari mother wrapping herself around her larvae, trying to shield them from the fire that was falling from the sky. Civilians being herded into camps, ships full of refugees being blown apart as they tried to run. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. Behind him, Lieutenant Megan Price, his tactical officer, stared at the screen with a look of cold anger on her face. She was a tough woman, raised on a mining colony, and not much shook her. But this shook her. "How long has this been going on?" Danny asked. Kyle checked his console. "The first attack started 3 days ago, sir. The Selthari have been calling for help since day one. Nobody has answered." Danny stood up. "Get me a secure channel to Earth Command, now." The message reached Earth in minutes, carried by the faster-than-light communication relays that linked human space together. It landed on the desk of Admiral Connie Marsh, the commander of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Connie was 58 years old, a career officer who had spent her entire adult life in uniform. She had lost her own son in the Titan uprising 12 years earlier, and the grief had turned her into something hard and unbreakable. She did not waste time on politics or pretty words. She dealt in facts. She watched the footage from the Selthari worlds 3 times. Then she sat in silence for a long time. The Velkar had already sent a message to Earth. Their ambassador, a massive reptilian figure called War Speaker Drothon, had made the Dominion's position very clear. "This matter does not concern your kind," the message read. "Remain in your corner of the stars, and you will not be harmed. Interfere, and you will learn why the galaxy fears the Velkar." Connie read the message and deleted it. She called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Defense Council. The council was made up of politicians, diplomats, and military leaders from every major nation on Earth. They gathered in the Great Hall beneath the Rocky Mountains, a room built to withstand a nuclear war, and they argued. The diplomats said that Earth should stay out of it. The Selthari were not allies. There was no treaty, no agreement, no obligation. Getting involved in a war against the Velkar was madness. The Dominion had 4,000 ships. Humanity had fewer than 300. The numbers spoke for themselves. The politicians worried about the cost. War was expensive. People would die. Voters would be upset. It was easier to send thoughts and prayers and let someone else deal with it. But Connie Marsh was not interested in easy. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. Without saying a word, she played the footage on the chamber's main screen. The room fell silent. They watched the Selthari mother burning. They watched children die. They watched an entire civilization being crushed, while the galaxy stood by and did nothing. When the footage ended, Connie looked at the council members one by one. I did not join the military to watch innocent people die while I sat on my hands, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of iron. I do not care about treaties. I do not care about numbers. I care about what is right. Those people are dying, and they are dying because nobody in this galaxy has the courage to stand up and say enough. I am saying it now. Enough. The room was quiet for a long time. Then the vote was called. It passed. Not by a large margin, but it passed. Humanity would go to war. The orders were sent out across human space. Reserve fleets were activated. Shipyards increased production. Soldiers who had been on leave packed their bags and reported for duty. It was not a popular decision with everyone. There were protests on Earth, on Mars, on the colony worlds. People were afraid. They had every right to be. But the ships launched anyway. Aboard the Arcadia, Danny Holt received the orders on his personal screen. He read them twice, then stood up and faced his crew. All hands, this is the commander. We have received orders from Earth Command. We are to proceed at best speed to the Selthari border and join the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. Our mission is to stop the Veilkar invasion. He paused. He could see the fear on some of their faces. He could also see determination. I will not lie to you. This will be hard. The enemy is big, and they are mean, and they think we are too small to matter. We are going to prove them wrong. Megan Price ran a final check on the weapon systems and reported all green. Kyle Burton opened a fleet-wide channel. Danny spoke into it, and his words carried across the stars to every human ship within range. All ships, this is the Arcadia. We have authorization. Set course for the Selthari border. We are going to war. Far away, in the throne room of his flagship, War Speaker Drothon received reports that the humans were mobilizing. He read the intelligence briefings. Fewer than 300 ships, short-lived crews, no experience fighting a real interstellar war. He tossed the report aside and told his generals not to worry. The humans will send a small force, he said, showing his teeth in what passed for a Veilkar smile. They will make noise, wave their little flags, and then they will run when they see our numbers. They are soft creatures who care too much about their individual lives. They do not have the stomach for real war. Every strategic model, every historical precedent, every piece of logic supported his conclusion. But logic had never met humanity before.